Hi, everybody. Welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven, and our guest today is Melissa Drake. She's the author, among other things. She's the author of a number of books. The most recent, the title is, get this, The Orgasmic Entrepreneur. Discover the sweet spot of love, sex, and business by simply being you. She has previously written books. The other titles are Sacred Medicine Integration, a companion journal supporting ceremonial medicine experiences, and TranscenDANCE, as in dancing. TranscenDANCE, lessons from living, loving, and dancing. So before I tell you a little bit more about Melissa, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you, Mark. I'm really grateful to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Well, sure. And there's a lot to talk about. I'm curious to hear about your book and your story and more, but a little bit more about Melissa Drake. She is also a TEDx speaker with 25 years climbing the corporate ranks and a decade of entrepreneurial experience. Her TEDx talk, The Dance of Collaboration, and I'll link to that in the show notes. You can find it online. It presents fresh insights on the benefits of collectively beneficial collaborations. So I hope today's podcast is a collectively beneficial collaboration for you, Melissa, and for the audience. I think this will be really nice.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree. It already is. So thank you.
Okay. And Melissa is the founder of Uncorped Influence. Melissa helps like-minded businesses and individuals find creative solutions and to go further than they thought possible. So quick question, uncorped means getting out of corporate life?
Exactly. Yeah. So essentially taking the same skills that I used in the corporate environment on a freelance basis.
Good. So maybe we can talk about that later as well. So as we always do here, Melissa, from the different phases of your career, the different things you've done, looking back, what would you say is your favorite mistake?
Well, there are so many. I've had many mistakes and lessons along the way, but as I looked at the different mistakes, and I use that term loosely because a mistake is, part of the process, right? There was one thread that really underlined all of the larger mistakes or lessons that I've learned in my life. And that thread is the mistake of not taking care of who I am as a person and not doing and pursuing the things that bring me joy. The minute I lose track of who I am and what I'm here to do and stop taking care of those everyday simple activities like walking and meditating and drinking water, the easier it is for me to fall back into old patterns. And a lot of my old patterns aren't all that positive. They're addictive and, based on trauma responses, survival responses. And I think one of the reasons why this is one of my favorite mistakes is because it's the most fun to fix.
The most fun to fix.
Yes, because the fix of this mistake is taking care of me. It's having fun. It's going out and doing things that are joyful and connecting with people who are doing those same things. What I've found and what's become really abundantly clear to me lately is that the happier I am, the more opportunity I have. And it's also a really challenging mistake because society tells us when things aren't going well to just double down and, work harder and hustle and grind. And that's not necessarily the answer for me. The answer is often the opposite, which is rest and take care of myself and connect with people who are good for my soul.
Yeah.
And so it's a battle. It's an internal battle because it's so counterintuitive to what we were taught, particularly in the corporate world. But it is the thing that has given me the best results.
So your mistake, it sounds like it's a pattern of not taking care of who you are as a person. So it's a fairly complex, pattern of things that were happening or not happening. How did you start to discover? Was there a particular moment? Was it gradual where your eyes kind of got open to this?
Yes, and as most lessons from the universe are, it was a very painful one. And that was, I wrote about it a lot in my first book, TranscenDANCE, but I got awakened from some really unfortunate events. Like I lost both of my parents in the same year. And a few years later, I got very sick with 2 chronic illnesses. My son went away to college, so I was an empty nest mom. I was very sick, and then I lost my corporate job. So it was like all of the negative, I like to call them life's tough transitions. They all kind of happened at once, and I had no choice but to be like, okay, I need to do something different here. Yeah. And that was in 2013 to 2015. That's when I really kind of woke up and just really started doing things differently in my life. And then the other big awakening came from me after I moved to California. So I moved from the Midwest to California to follow my dreams. And at the time that I moved, I was really happy. I was really like just taking care of myself and excited. And I got to California and I started focusing on making a living instead of actually living. So I did that traditional double down, work all the time. I never got out. I loved to dance. I didn't dance for a long time. And I just ultimately fell into that old pattern of, just trying to make things work and not getting anywhere. And ultimately, sometimes you have to take a step back to move forward.
And I'm going to use a phrase, and I don't mean it to be critical, but I've heard other people sort of talk about going through life on autopilot. Were you in that mode? Tell us more.
Very much so. And I think that's where the pattern begins for me, or where the goodness ends, is when I go from actively creating my own reality and being excited about it to being stressed out by it and running on autopilot. And that's a perfect description of how to be miserable. And I spent a lot of time there for sure. Yeah.
And you talk about the idea of making a living, or making a life, living a life. I imagine you sort of rationalize things or make excuses. Or I hate this phrase. People say they call it work for a reason. And you say, well, I have all these reasons to stay with it. I have reasons to leave. I can't. I'm curious to hear more about your thought process, or at least your reflections on the thought process before you made changes.
Well, unfortunately, sometimes we don't make changes until we absolutely have to. So when I lost my corporate job, I was like, okay, I got to do something different here. And it gave me the opportunity to really consider what I wanted to do. Like the easy thing would have been to get another corporate job doing the same thing. And I knew that in my heart, like my literal heart, that was not good for me. And so I really had to do things differently. And that meant learning new skills and trying new things and building on what I already knew and already had accomplished in the corporate world, but repositioning it for a different lifestyle and repositioning those skills to do things totally different. And just making those deliberate choices. So instead of being on autopilot, going to the office every day, making a deliberate choice to do something radically different. And in my case, that radically different was changing my entire locale and moving across the country.
So I'm curious how you found your fix or your fixes. How much of it was looking within and trying to figure out what you really wanted or needed versus trying to get advice or coaching from others?
That's a really good question. I think initially I relied far too heavily on other coaches. I invested thousands of dollars in coaching and programs and certifications and all of the things. And I recently had a coach tell me all of the money you spent on coaches, you should have just paid yourself because you already have all this. And so I searched far too wide to get input and often validation from other people instead of relying on my own instincts. And that's still a challenge for me. I definitely don't think we can do this alone. And we absolutely need support along the way. But I know that I relied far too heavily on other people initially. And now I'm kind of like, oh, okay, what do I think? And, really relying on myself before I still use the support of coaches and other people, but not to the extent of bypassing my own journey.
Sure. And, one other question, I guess, about going through this process, and that's a phrase you used in your latest book.
Yes, it is a process.
And want to talk more about that as you've gone through this process and these changes. How do you make sure you don't fall back into those old habits? Is it as easy as not taking another corporate job, or is there more to it?
No, there's a lot more to it. And to say that I haven't fallen back in those patterns would be a misnomer, because I have. And I also believe that's part of the process. We think growth is just the steady climb, and it's not. It's, you've seen the meme where, we think it goes like this, but it's really just these spirals and this crazy journey all around. And so that was a huge learning process for me, is to understand that even though I think I've learned something, and I have learned a lot in my lifetime, there are always more layers, and we can continue to learn the same thing over and over again at a deeper level. So to think that, we've learned it and we've made it, I don't think that's the truth. I used to think that was the truth.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of the mistake that I made is, I think I've made it, so now I can back off on all of these things that got me there. In terms of how to stay there, for me, it's community and accountability. First, self-responsibility, like just the awareness of, hey, I'm responsible for this life. No one else is going to save me. No one else is going to create this. No one else is going to create a path for me. And I get to create that on my own. That's the first realization. And then the second is, who am I going to get to come alongside me to help me create the life that I want? And the people you surround, you've heard the 5 people you spend the most time with reflect your environment. And that's very, very true. So part of that was the move and just surrounding myself with a completely different culture and experience. And that was like an immediate up level in just doing that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your reflections and your thoughts. There's a lot of wisdom there. Like you said, we learn as we go. So
we think we know it all, and then we're like, oh no, I didn't really know that to the level that I thought it did, or the level that I need to. And then ultimately you get to this place where you're like, oh, I don't know anything. Like there's just so much to learn.
Life has a way of reminding us when if we think we have it all figured out. No, you get reminded, like you said.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So the most recent book, the title, I talk about the title, and then there's a lot to dig into within the book. And again, that title, and it's eye-catching. It might not be a hard copy you want to carry around the office. Right. I mean, if you're reading it on a Kindle, I guess that's an advantage. iPad app, nobody knows what you're reading, but the title.
It's not a coffee table book for you?
I don't. Well, maybe let's talk about whether it should be, or if we shouldn't be afraid to do that. But again, the title is The Orgasmic Entrepreneur. Discover the sweet spot of love, sex, and business by simply being you. So, there are some topics that, to some might be taboo. I'm trying not to blush or giggle like a teenage boy here or anything. But, in all seriousness, did you have any fear that the title of the book was somehow, it might be a mistake? Or how did you evaluate different options for the title? Or did you say at some point, no, this is it? Maybe it's not for everybody, but this is my book.
All of those things. But the best answer for that is that I actually, so the premise of the book and why I decided to write it in the first place was I was listening to a podcast where this chief technology officer was talking about data and how important data is. And just the way he talked about data was so endearing to me. And I just all of a sudden had this thought that data geeks make the best lovers because they're always looking for the sweet spot. And even when they find the sweet spot, they don't stop. Like, they're always looking to improve it. And growing up in direct mail, I know how detailed data geeks can get and just making simple improvements. And so I had a lot of different titles for the book. The original title was Dance of the Entrepreneur, because I wanted to go with my, kind of match the branding with the TEDx Talk and the first book. But we actually tested multiple titles. Mm-hmm. And this is the one that won. And so based on that theory, I can't claim data to be super valuable and then not follow the data. And I knew that it would be a turnoff. Like, I knew that there would be people that are uncomfortable with it. But a large part of the book is about being who you are, even when it's weird, even when it's strange, even when it's taboo to other people. I know it's a turnoff to some people, but there are other people that are like, oh, that's my, like, that's exciting to me. And those are my people. Yeah. So I knew it was a risk, and I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And who's the target audience for the book? It's written by a woman. Do people think, well, okay, well, here's a book for other women, or, I've read big chunks of it. So it's not, I guess I'm answering my own question from my own experience. I would say it's not just a book for women. Is there that perception ever, or questions about that?
Well, I think what's interesting, and that the title is a misnomer, because there's very little talk of orgasms in the book. And you know that from having read it. Right. So it's, and this is probably it is part of who I am. We judge people based on the cover, and we don't take the time to really dig in. And so it even creates an extra hurdle for me, because I know that people will judge the cover, but also the people who either don't judge it or judge it, but still look at it. Those are the people that I really want to connect with. Those are the people who I want to really get the message. And if they're judgmental about it, that's okay. That's fine. Maybe they're just not my people.
Yeah, I was about to say that's their mistake, or like I said, maybe it's just they're not your people. But I think your book shows that as adults, we can. In your case, you write about you're using words orgasmic and love and sex, and that doesn't mean anything raunchy.
No, not at all.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, like I said, there's very little talk of orgasms, or there is some talk of it, obviously. But again, it's not raunchy. It's natural. It's normal. These are topics that were shamed, that are some of the most beautiful gifts we have in the world. And I want people to be able to take advantage of that, and to be able to have a conversation and communication, the written word, words in general. That's how we connect. And why would we shame or walk away from something that's so beautiful?
Right. It's a part of, with extreme outliers. It's part of everybody. It's part of life. It's part of everybody's lived experience. And in the book, you talk about sexuality as a taboo topic. There are other taboos. What are there other taboos that require more discussion?
Yeah, I think the whole the whole growth journey that we talked about, the fact that it's a process, the fact that when we don't go where we think we're going to go, is sometimes shameful and hurtful. But it's just part of the process. It's part of life, and just understanding that we're all human on this journey, and none of us are perfect, and none of us have it figured out. I think one of the bigger lessons for me in the book was the chapter on giving without strings, and really like digging into that, what it looks like to be a collaborative partner and be a partner in a way that doesn't have expectations or underlying motives. And I realized, and this is one of the things why I love writing so much, is that I realized through the process of writing that I had been doing it wrong, that I was being unknowingly manipulative in what I had done. And so uncovering those lessons for myself, and I think that's one of the biggest advantages of writing a book, is the healing that takes place along the way. Like you go to some, and it's hard, don't get me wrong, like these depths that you go to. You've written books, like how was that experience for you in writing?
I mean, I think there was never a fear of really touching on anything really taboo, but there's that fear of your book being rejected. I think that often leads an author to be afraid to go ahead and put something out there and get feedback from people who aren't your friends and family, who are probably likely to say something nice.
Yes.
There's a hesitation in general. So I could see hesitation to put out a book that talks about particularly personal stories, which my books are not in that category. So I can only appreciate how much more difficult it is, maybe not just to process it and write it, but then again, to put it's out there with your name on it. This is not a pseudonym.
It's very vulnerable. Yeah.
It is
incredibly vulnerable. And when I work with authors, they often say, like, I don't think they're afraid to tell the truth. They just are afraid to like share the dark stuff because they've been so shamed or taught that their experience is taboo or unusual. But then as soon as you put it out there, you have all these people that are like, oh, me too. Like that was, I've had so many people say that was my story or that was my experience. And when we're afraid to share the experience, we lose out on the connection of the other people saying me too. And the other people then suddenly have this understanding and this acceptance of themselves that they wouldn't have. And we're able to connect on a very intimate level that we wouldn't have if we hadn't been that vulnerable. And that's a whole nother chapter in the book about vulnerability and authenticity. I think we get so used to like showing up in a way that we're expected, or like in the corporate world was very different, just even in how I looked. There were different standards around that. In the corporate world versus entrepreneurship, just truly being able to be who you are is a gift.
Yeah. Well, and so, for example, and you write about this, a taboo for some is tattoos.
Yeah.
In a corporate setting. Tell us in those watching on YouTube can see.
Oh yeah, sorry.
A couple tattoos, and I mean, but what was the reaction or the feared reaction in the corporate setting as a way of you expressing you?
It wasn't welcomed, I'll tell you that. And my job elimination came immediately after I got my second tattoo. And I had been working with a consultant, and he was much older than I was, and very much from a different time. And he's like, don't ever get a tattoo because, you meet with clients and yada, yada, yada. And I didn't for a long time. And then I got a very purposeful tattoo of my son, and I got matching tattoos. And then after my mother died, I got a tattoo commemorating her. And I was always very uncomfortable with it. And then after I lost my job, I got another tattoo that says, everything happens for a reason. And I turned a few heads in the office after that. Because after I lost my job, I had to continue to work for a couple of weeks to transition all of my responsibilities. And it wasn't done out of spite, but it was very much like a statement and a core belief that I have.
Yeah. So a bold statement you make in the book, and it seems like it's become a core belief. You talk about finding the link between achieving sexual satisfaction and attaining strong business results. And so the engineer statistician in me has to ask, is this correlation or causation? When you say there's a link, that's the next question, right? Correlation or causation?
There is a link.
Yeah.
And it is, so, I mean, when you talk about the system and the sacral chakra is related to creativity and sexual activity. And, I just find personally, when I'm having regular sexual activity in one way or another, I'm much more creative. And the more creative that I am, particularly as an entrepreneur, the more successful I am. And it's just that whole sharing of the energy and, just it's an expression, right? Like sexual activity is an expression of who we are. And when we limit that expression, we limit the expression overall.
Yeah.
And it's one of those challenging things that we deal with. And I'm a single person, so like it just impacts me even greater, not having that kind of exchange. But I'm also not about having the exchange for the sake of having the exchange.
Sure. That might not have the same link to business results.
No, in fact,
right?
It's detrimental from what I've experienced.
And in what way do you think? Is that
because it's for me personally, it's more draining than it is life-giving. And we want the life-giving juice, the juice that's going to bring about the creativity and the flow that we want.
Yeah.
And for that particular chapter, because that's not my experience right now, that's another thing that's unique about this book, is that I invited other contributors to write chapters of the book that I personally can't say I've mastered. And that's one of them. So I had a relationship coach who was also a sexual coach of mine a few years ago write that chapter. And she's a brilliant writer, and she knows her stuff. So that was a really beautiful contribution to the book. Yeah.
So one other thing I wanted to ask a couple, there are two chapters we dig into a little bit here from the book, again, The Orgasmic Entrepreneur. In that chapter, it's a process. And I want to talk about this in a non-explicit way, because I think we can avoid the explicit tag for the episode, which might help more people maybe, not avoid it. So
judge the cover.
So there's a point in the book where I'm going to censor a little bit. This is a word that I would normally, be okay with in everyday life. Your 25-year-old son told you life is a series of F-ups and restarts. The key is to F up a bunch. Then you realize how not to F up, and that's how you progress. So where do you think, so as a 25-year-old, where do you think he got that insight to be able to share that with you?
I don't know. This kid has been sharing gems like that since he was 2 years old. Like he is literally my greatest teacher in the world. And he's got some life experience under his belt and some taboo experience under his belt. And he's never, ever been afraid of expressing who he is. And as part of that expressing who he is, particularly outsiders view that as an F-up, right? When it doesn't conform to what's expected, then suddenly his behavior or who he is the F-up. So like he has a lot of experience for a now 26-year-old gentleman. And he is absolutely my greatest teacher and my biggest advisor. And I think that's one thing that we as parents can do, is to really listen to our children, because I grew up in the era of children should be seen and not heard. And my son taught me that he would always be heard. And I didn't always want to hear what he had to say. But when I really allowed him to say it, I always learned, always.
And it
And,
sounds like he's learned from you, and he may very well avoid what you were framing as your favorite mistake as he makes his path through his own.
He doesn't have a problem with that, my favorite mistake, because he has always put himself first. And I admire that about him greatly. Like, I really, really admire that about him, that he put himself first. And again, he's my greatest teacher in that respect, because I see how valuable it is for him. And he just kind of came out of the womb doing that. And I have, like I said, I haven't always liked it, but I've always supported it.
Sure. There's another couple sentences in that chapter that resonated with me, and I think the themes of the podcast here. So I'm just going to quote it and maybe ask you to elaborate on it. The thing about innovation, entrepreneurship, and love, they're all nonlinear processes. They're experimental, and improvements are incremental. That's speaking my language.
Yes. Well, and recently I've been in some circles where we talk about our lives as an experiment. So, trying to get healthy, like, what are the inputs to make the right outputs or make the right results? And just looking at it as an experiment, and not this is the only way it has to be. We try something. If it doesn't work, we try something else, just like his original quote is, right? We try something, it feels like an F up, so we just start over. And every single time, again, back to the data and direct mail, we're learning lessons, and then we're applying it and tweaking it and changing it. And you can literally get downright scientific in how to create new results. But we're so used to creating those results in a business aspect, we don't think about doing it for ourselves. Mm-hmm. So how do we apply that same business knowledge? And that's really the essence of the book. The things that we learned in business, they don't apply just for business. They apply in dating, they apply in sex, they apply in parenting, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think that what they learn in the business applies to life, but not as many people know or understand that what they learn in life, the fun parts of life, like dating and sex and relationships and parenting, can apply to business as well. And that's one of the, I think for me, one of the most challenging things is that, when you think about love, for example, one of my clients has this amazing quote that love is the greatest competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the corporate world, love is like,
it's not to be talked about.
Exactly.
Well, and so a little bit of my journey through my career and through life was going from manufacturing into healthcare. Mm-hmm. And in healthcare, people will use the word love and talk about that as of value and something that's not only okay to talk about at work, how that's an important part of a caring, healing healthcare organization. Love for the patients, love for the employees, and not in a paternalistic way, and certainly not in an inappropriate way, but in a loving, caring.
Yeah. I love who you are as a person. I love your growth. I love where you're going. I love supporting you in your journey. It's completely different than a lust kind of love or something along those lines. It's very supportive.
Well, and when we say a lust kind of love, that's just lust.
Yes, thank you.
I mean, there are.
That's why they have sexual harassment seminars. Yes.
Yeah, and that's why there's two different words. There's two different words there, but so it's a process, and there are experiments and learning. And one other thing you said in the book is, that we need to have this willingness to experience hurt. And sometimes people would call it failure. Sometimes we talk about mistake. At the very beginning of the episode, you sort of said, well, I'm paraphrasing, but I got the sense that, you said, I don't like to think of things as mistakes, and that's fine. And that's fine. But is there a way, when you talk about, needing to be more willing to experience that hurt, are there ways that we can get better at that or become less afraid of the hurt or the failure?
I think that's how we develop resilience, right? And the way to do it is to keep showing up. Even when it's messy, even when you don't feel like it, even when it's ugly, just continue to show up and do the work. And remember that doing the work looks different for every person. Doing the work, as I said earlier, isn't necessarily doubling down and working 80 hours a week. Sometimes doing the work is taking the afternoon to go on a walk.
Yeah.
And just continue. Like for me, the biggest thing to get past lessons or mistakes is to simply not give up and not quit. And also, sometimes it's okay to quit. Sometimes, if you're in this toxic relationship, then yeah, it's best to quit that. Don't just keep showing up and enduring, but like really revisiting who you are as a person and what resonates with you, quitting the things that don't resonate and going after in full force the ones that do.
Yeah. So then, there's another chapter in the book titled Sex and Creativity. And Stacey Herrera, and remind me, was she the author of the chapter, or did she just contribute a large piece to it?
I wrote the first part of the chapter, which basically talks about what I already shared, how I met her, what she does, and then the rest of it was all her.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Stacey and how you got her involved in the book.
So Stacey was one of my she was one of my coaches, specifically a sex coach. And I had a period of life where I had been single for decades, and I was in a relationship for the first time and just really exploring my sexuality. It was after I lost my job, and just really learning about who I am as a person and finding that spark and that connection. And she was the one to guide me through that. And one of the things that she introduced me to for the first time was the masculine feminine polarity dynamics. And that was really eye-opening for me. The other thing that she really introduced me to was the art of presence, and knowing that no matter what the past was, or how bad the past may have been, or how anxious we may be about the future, when we are present, we're always okay. Like in this moment, no matter what's going on, we're okay. And so just being able to drop into that. And then when you add the juiciness of relationship and sexuality, it just kind of expands that. So she was one of my greatest teachers, and she has remained a good friend and someone that I love very much. And when I asked her about contributing to the book and what it means to be a I can't say the word out loud, but a well-effed entrepreneur.
Okay.
She was like, yeah, you had me. Okay, I'm in. Like there was no question whatsoever. She's like, yeah, I'm in.
Yeah. And it's not that you can't say the word, but here you're trying, okay. Yes. We both,
yes. No, I understand.
We don't have to bleep ourselves. Or I don't need to go back in and put in a bleep sound effect. It's easier just to say.
Yes.
But so in so it sounds like you learned, and Stacey writes about, you learned from her, again, connections between, as she puts it, the connection between profitable businesses and great sex in whatever order.
And it's really not even about great sex. It's about intimacy, which is completely different. And so that's where she really pulled out some greatness, is talking about the difference between sex and intimacy. And she also, I mentioned earlier about the whole giving without strings. That was, reading her work was one of the things that helped me realize how I had been giving inappropriately, thinking I'm being virtuous in my giving. And then after I read what she wrote, I was like, oh yeah, I wasn't doing that right at all. So it's just continual light bulb moments for me, reading her work. And even my editor was like, this chick is brilliant. And I'm like, I know, that's why I invited her. All the contributors in the book are really brilliant. One of my my partner in a business endeavor, Jesse Panama, contributed a couple chapters. I had one of my healers contribute a chapter on attraction versus promotion. And then I also had a couple. So this was interesting. You know, the whole sex and relationships. I had a couple who they're married and they do business together. So what does that actually look like to be in partnership doing this work together? So they contributed a chapter as well.
That's great. And people can learn more about, I'm going to share Melissa's website, but Stacy's website here, I've got your book pulled back up. She's creator of the Sensuality Project. So her website is thesensualityproject.com. It says here, lifestyle movement for 40 plus singles and couples who want to improve their sex lives and have mature, intimate relationships. And again, thank you for pointing out the difference in the terms here, where I talked about, love versus love and lust is two different words, different things, sex and intimacy, and these things, sometimes these go hand in hand. Sometimes they're different. So Melissa's website is uncorpedinfluence.com. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes. And tell us about your company and who you serve, what kind of work that you do under that umbrella.
Absolutely. Thank you. So my primary positioning is working with authors. Like, I love to help people tell stories. And that kind of started as an editing gig. I worked for a coaching company and edited all of their blog posts for their coaches. I really enjoyed working with spiritual entrepreneurs and people who really want to experience growth through the writing of their book. And so I help people, again, I started as editing, but I'm really more of a publishing partner that will take them from inception to publishing, promotion, PR, and all of that good stuff. I also do speaking and corporate training events and writing. I love writing. I have a background in business analysis. So I just kind of have a lot of different skills, to be honest with you. And just like to help people. One of my clients said to me, she said, I love talking to you because even though there are problems, we only talk about solutions. And so that's really my thing. I like organizing chaos and creating systems to manage that.
There's a lot involved in not just writing a book, but like you said, bringing it to market and doing that well. So thank you for working with authors on that. And I bet the lessons, the things you've talked about today, the things you've written about are incorporated in that work, helping authors fail in the first draft and then make things better, right?
Yes.
Testing ideas, writing a book and publishing a book is certainly a process. So I can see the dots to connect between what we've talked about today and that work that you do.
Oh, thank you. One of the things that I've just really recently figured out is I think my real value is the emotional support that I provide authors along the way. As someone who has been there, done that, written really, really vulnerable work, because there's so much anxiety that comes up when you're sharing a work like this. So I really enjoy connecting with them on that level and using the tools that I learned to help me get out of that kind of spin cycle.
Yeah. Part of figuring out how to do it is how to get through it. And I think you help. Sounds like you help with both of those.
I do. Yes.
Those elements there.
I might have to quote you on that.
If that phrase, I just came up with that phrase popped into my head and inspired by what you're talking about. So if that's helpful, take that phrase.
I will. Thank you. Thank you.
Our guest today has been Melissa Drake. Again, her company is Uncorped Influence. You can go online, uncorpedinfluence.com. There'll be links in the show notes to her social media. I'm glad that you're uncorped, Melissa. I'm glad that you joined us.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you joined us today because you getting uncorped. I got uncorped more than a decade ago.
Excellent.
I got more than a decade ago. But anyway. Back to you and your book. You got me sidetracked reflecting on that's an interesting word, uncorped. It's like unlocked, unleashed.
Yes.
Uncorped. So uncorpedinfluence.com. And again, the title of Melissa's book, her most recent book, The Orgasmic Entrepreneur, Discovered the Sweet Spot of Love, Sex, and Business by Simply Being You. So thank you for being you. Thank you for being here, Melissa. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too.